Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you are. My name is Colin Gumbo from Gogla. I'll be a moderator of this session today. But I think let's provide another 3-4 minutes to allow more people to join the call, and then we get started. I think we can get started. We have 38 participants in the call, so I think that's good enough to start. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Colin Gumbu. I'm Policy and Advocacy Manager for Gogla, and I'll be moderating this session today. So it's yet another webinar organized by the End User Subsidy Lab. And our topic for discussion today is subsidy delivery models and verification. So let's get straight to the flow of agenda. Brenda, if you can click to the next slide. Good. So as you can see the flow of agenda, we want this session to last exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I'll talk a bit about the subsidy lab, what we are doing, and also about the design framework for the subsidy. I'll use about 5 minutes. Then I will do a short presentation to set the context of the discussion. And then we will have, to hear from our 3 speakers today from SNV and also from Access to Energy Institute, and also, I believe, from Daylight. So that I think that will last around 30 minutes. And then we will have Q&A for 25 minutes. So we think that for Q&A, I think it's good to ask orally, and then we'll be more than happy to respond to the question. But yet again, we will have a chat box. So feel free to provide your comments, your thoughts. But I think in terms of direct question, let's do it orally. And then we'll finish up the call with the next steps, what the lab will be up to in the coming days. So before wasting more time, I think let me give time to our 3 speakers to introduce themselves. one by one. I will start with Lynette. Please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Lynette Korir. I work for SNV. I'm an energy advisor. Over 9 years experience in the energy sector. I'm happy to be here to talk about our experience as SNV in end user subsidies. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynette. Carl?
Everyone, my name is Carl Scari. I'm Chief Product and Strategy Officer at D-Light. I've been working in the off-grid energy access sector for over a decade. And I'm actually based in the San Francisco area. So it's very early my time.
Thanks, Carl. And finally, Tom.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas. I am a former Mobisol person, now Access to Energy Institute, and always been interested in digital technologies to save time and money.
Thanks, Tom. I think now the next step is to know who else is in the room. So we are going to have a short poll. Brenda, if you can, let's all respond to the poll question so that we know who is in the room. Good. I think we can all see the results. So as expected, we have more companies from the private sector, a bit of, NGO, and also a good representation from development agents. And as expected, private sector and development agents have been key in terms of implementing end user subsidy. So this, I think, was expected. And also, I think it's very, very good to see that we also have government representative in the room. So that's good, good. Brenda, if we can go to the next slide, please. Brenda?
Yeah, it's on the next slide.
Okay.
Can you?
Good. Yeah, so I think let me talk about the lab. So this is a platform. The End User Subsidy Lab is a platform basically of sharing knowledge and technical expertise that at the end of the day will inform the design of smart subsidies. So the lab, the End User Subsidy Lab, is being coordinated right now, I would say, by 4 players or 4 actors: SMAP, Stroke World Bank, NDEV, Gogla, and also of late we've been joined by Clean Cooking Alliance. So so it's not only about soliciting knowledge and getting the expertise, but we are also trying to see what models can be piloted and implemented on the ground. So I think, and what we do usually, we have periodic webinars like the one we have today, where we share knowledge, and then at the end of the day, whatever is coming out of such webinar are being documented, and you can all see them in our Google website. Next, please, Brenda. It's slow. Is it slow on my part? Anyway, so so today's webinar is a continuation of, I would say, 4 webinar series that had started way back in September. What we're trying to cover are the key, I would say, 5 key consideration when you design end user subsidy. So the way we structured the webinar is to have time to discuss each component, starting with the targeting and beneficiaries, the eligible products, how to deliver the subsidy, the verification, and later exit. And as I said, today we are on the third webinar, and we will be more than happy to deliberate on how subsidy are being delivered and how can you do the verification to make sure that to be ensured that the subsidy have been passed to the beneficiaries. So whatever is coming out of these 4 webinars will inform the contents of the toolkit. We have the design toolkit, which is right now being prepared by OCA. So the work is supposed to end December this year, and as I said, all the inputs that we are getting from these 4 webinars will be used in preparation of the design toolkit. As I speak, this framework that we are talking about is being piloted by, I would say, by NDEF. There is a pilot subsidy scheme that are being piloted in 4 countries, financed by the government of the Netherlands. These 4 countries, I believe, are Malawi, Uganda, Liberia, and Niger. So yeah, next slide, please. Okay, now let me try to set the context of the discussion today. So in terms of delivering the subsidy, there are some key decisions that have got to be made. First, about the delivery channel, and then who are the participating companies, and also how do you, or the mode of the payment, the timing, the number of installments, how you pay. So in terms of the delivery channel is around, will the subsidy be delivered as cash to the beneficiaries, or will it be delivered through the participating companies that participate in the program? But also in a digital way, subsidy can also be delivered automatic when the customer pays in the system, and then the grant can automatically match the payment. But this, as I said, require a very good technology to do that, as it is happening in the CISO program in Togo. In terms of the subsidy disbursement, I think the traditional way is the disbursement is made to the companies once the verification is made at the end. But also to ease, I think, the operation of the companies, there is some incidences where you have a upfront payment before the operation starts by the companies, and then it's being complemented by the payment at the end after the verification is made. But also we've seen a situation where also there is another component of the payment where the payment is made to ensure that the operations are sustainable. In terms of selecting the companies, what is happening is the companies that are to participate have got to meet minimum eligibility criteria on a first-come, first-served basis. But also it's possible that the selection can be made through a tender. There are some other decisions that also have got to be considered, especially in terms of administration. How expensive it is to run the program, to run the models. So it's also very key to have questions to such a, to have an answer to such a question. Next, please, Brenda. Good. Now, in terms of verification, we have seen, or we have experienced that we have like 3 options. The verification is important because we just want to have confidence and assurance that at the end of the day, the end users have benefited from the subsidy. So first, you could do the verification manually through the phones, through the physical check. Of course, as expected, it will take a while, and it's also expensive. But with technology, you can also do the verification using the software, GSM network, the mobile, transaction that can be seen, because usually the payment are made through mobile money in most cases. So you can use the technology to cross-check whether the beneficiaries have received the subsidy. Again, you can do the hybrid. You can combine the manual system and the technology-enabled option. Usually what we have seen is the technology starts and then the manual system is there just to ensure that everything is okay at the end. And as expected, I think you'll be choosing some few samples to do that. So you need technology to do that. It will be a bit expensive also. But then I don't want to preempt the discussion. This is what we are seeing on the ground, but I think we will hear more from our speakers today. And I think we will also get some feedback from the members who are in this call to know more about what is happening on the ground. Next, please, Brenda. So the key questions that will be asked, will be discussed during this session, of course, they've been categorized into how do you deliver and how do you do the verification. So in terms of the delivery, the issue around what are the advantages and disadvantages of the delivery of each of the delivery model? What should be considered when you select a certain delivery channel? And how should the subsidy be disbursed on structure to ensure optimal uptake? And in terms of verification, is what methods do exist? How can the verification costs be effective and be balanced to ensure there is optimal implementation and the use of the public funds? So these are like the kind of questions that we expect to be answered during today's session. Next, please, Brenda. So let's have two questions or two set of polls to hear your reaction. So the second one is about how many companies should be allowed to participate. Let's see what you have to say on this. Okay. Good. So the feedback we're getting from the room that it should be as open as possible. So the implementation should be, in terms of the company to participate, should be as many as possible, should be open to all companies meeting basic eligibility criteria. And 68% of the people in this room say that it should be open. I think what we are also seeing here, that the monopoly towards participating is not desired. So yeah, that's good to see. Next poll, please, Brenda. The last one, I believe. I think mine is slow to react. Brenda, have you shared the last poll?
Yeah, I've launched the third poll.
Yeah,
and I can
it's
see
a bit,
the responses.
Yeah, it's a bit slow on in my machine. Yeah, but I think the question is around what's the most effective verification technique. Let's see what people have to say on this. Surprising, I can't see the poll, I can't see the results.
So I think the majority have opted for the third option, which is hybrid. Can you see that column?
No, I can't see. I can't see it here.
I'm sharing the results now.
Yeah, if you can, please share the results so that we get started with the
I
speakers.
think 91% have chosen the third option, which is hybrid, that is technology enabled, followed by manual verification.
Yeah, now I can see the results. It's very surprising that we don't have people desiring manual verification. Everybody wants to do the technology, and probably the combination of both is good. This is what people are saying. But as I said, let's not preempt it. Let's also hear the experience from the ground. And I think now let's move to our first speaker for today from Delight. Is from the private sector. So he will tell us the experience out there in terms of the delivery and what they've been experiencing. Carl, please go ahead.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I'll try to keep my presentation relatively brief so that we can save more time for Q&A at the end. And I wanted to start off by commenting on how far our industry has come over the last decade on this specific topic. I was co-chair of the GOGLA policy working group back in 2016. And at that point in time, we were arguing as an industry quite strongly against demand-side subsidies. We told governments and donors, stay out of it, don't distort markets. The private sector is going to, deliver universal energy access if you just stay out of our way. And I think we've realized over the last 7 years since then that it's very challenging to achieve universal energy access without having some level of demand side subsidy in these markets. So it's been a definite significant 180 over the last 7 years since I was co-chair of the GOGLA policy working group. And D-Light has quite a bit of experience working with donors, working with governments on a variety of subsidy programs, both supply side subsidy programs and demand side subsidy programs across various countries. And I can share some of our lessons learned. So we can advance to the next slide. So specifically, a small group of us private sector players, specifically D-Light, Sun King, and B-Box, got together back in 2020 to advocate for some best practices in demand-side subsidy program development. And we spent roughly a year working with a task force that actually included representatives from SNV, from World Bank, from some other private sector players, from GOGLA, et cetera, to think through what are the core features of a well-designed demand-side subsidy program that would be applicable across. And so what I've done for this presentation is I pulled out the specific recommendations that we had that were relevant for the subsidy delivery and verification. And this is just a kind of overview of some of those. Very self-explanatory, simple, straightforward, and transparent. We've seen subsidy programs in the past where they've been excessively complex and thus more expensive to administer, and haven't really generated results that were better than what could have been achieved with a simpler, more straightforward program. And so we recommend that when considering the structure of a demand-side subsidy program, when possible, try to keep things as simple and straightforward as you can. In terms of the instrument used, actually NDEV released a report back in 2021 looking at their experience in results-based financing over the prior 7-year period. and advocating for results-based financing as being the primary tool for subsidy delivery. And we agree with that assessment. They also acknowledge it's not a silver bullet. There are certain barriers, market barriers, that results-based financing doesn't necessarily address. Things like, if there's technical gaps in companies, technical assistance will be required to address that. If companies are very cash constrained, then an RBF instrument where you get paid only after the results are verified could cause pressure on companies that don't have the working capital to wait for subsidy payments until after they've delivered results and gotten verification. But in general, results-based financing instruments are the most effective and cost-effective method of subsidy delivery. In terms of how to structure the payments, we strongly advocate for payouts to companies rather than voucher systems. In a later slide, I'll explain more about that. And this question around how many companies should be allowed to participate, we definitely agree with this audience that it should be as open as possible, and that subsidies should be allocated on a first come, first served basis rather than instituting caps for each participating company. I'll get more into that on a later slide as well. We promote verification that leverages technology and is automated as much as possible. I'll talk more about that on a future slide as well. And then in terms of one of the biggest issues we've seen in prior subsidy programs is the turnaround time on payments. For some subsidy programs we participated in, the turnaround time has in some instances been more than 12 months. And you can imagine at that point in time, no one's factoring subsidies into their decision-making anymore. So you might as well not run a subsidy program if you can't commit to delivering the subsidy more frequently than 12 months after the submissions are made. It also causes a lot of cash flow constraints for smaller local distributors as you extend that time period out longer. And then in terms of the structure of the payments, we recommend an upfront component and a sustainability component that is paid at a later date. And I'll talk about that more on a future slide as well. So we can advance to the next slide now. So why are we promoting uncapped RBF payouts to companies? Again, I've already mentioned why RBFs are the most efficient use of limited funding. There's been a lot of work done on that that I could point to. I won't elaborate on that further here. And I think that's already kind of generally accepted in our industry at this stage. In terms of the company payouts, so they're much easier and less expensive to administer than a voucher system. And I think one of the other core benefits is they leverage the same infrastructure as existing supply-side subsidy programs. So we already have supply-side subsidy programs that have run or are currently running in various countries today, where you can just have the demand-side subsidy piggyback on an existing supply-side subsidy, instead of creating a whole separate mechanism for delivery. And so that's why we strongly advocate for company payouts rather than voucher systems. In terms of company caps, the reason that we are opposed to having company caps is that it greatly slows the disbursement of funds. And it means that companies that are overachieving need to stop and wait for reallocation of funds from companies that are underachieving once the overachievers have reached their caps. And if the objective is to maximize the connections achieved and to speed up the timeline for when that occurs, then adding in these company caps only serves to slow down achievement of those objectives. I think one of the motivations behind creating those caps is to ensure that one company doesn't take the lion's share of the funding. But you need to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the subsidy program? Is the purpose to create a bunch of companies, PAYGO companies in that market, or is the purpose to achieve as many connections as possible in a shorter period of time and with as little funding as possible. And so if your objective is as many connections as possible, a cap is not going to serve you towards that objective. And I think if your objective is to create as many companies as possible, you might also want to think about why that's your objective. Because we strongly believe that there's a minimum scale that pay-go solar system companies must operate at in order to be profitable. So there's likely to only be a few successful players in each market, just like in the telco sector, for example. And so if you're trying to create a dozen plus pay-go solar companies in a market, my question would be why? And do you think that 12 pay-go companies can coexist in a market of that size, and what leads you to believe that? So those are just some of the things to consider when looking at our subsidy delivery and caps. Can advance to the next slide. So in terms of verification, again, agree quite strongly with the folks on this call as well in terms of leveraging technology. So the experiences we've had in the past is there's been a lot of problems with onboarding of IVAs in subsidy programs we participated in. Again, that's sometimes been the issue behind why it's taken so long to receive payouts. There have been programs we've participated in where it has taken significantly longer than a year to get the IVA onboarded to even start doing verifications. Doing the manual verifications can be very expensive and time consuming. It makes it very difficult to achieve the quick turnaround times that I mentioned of trying to get down to 30 to 60 days from submission to payment. If you're doing that with manual verification, it's going to be incredibly challenging to do that. Another issue we've seen is that with the manual verification, oftentimes if they're doing it, let's say on phone calls, they will attempt to call customers. And if they aren't able to reach a customer, they will list that as an unverified customer. Now, just because someone couldn't pick up the phone doesn't mean that they didn't receive the product and wouldn't have said, yes, I have the product. And so you end up with really low verification rates, not due to faulty submissions or attempts at fraudulent behavior, but simply because customers couldn't answer the phone at that point in time. And I know there's other things that donors have tried to do and governments have tried to do to address the unreachability of customers, but in general, I think it's just very challenging if you're reliant on getting in touch with the customer in order to do verification. And then again, I mentioned earlier, infrequent verification leads to delayed payouts to companies. And if you're doing manual verification, it's unlikely that you're going to be wanting to do those manual verifications every single month. Usually they're spaced out. There's minimum numbers of submissions you need to do for each verification, et cetera. And what we found is that technology and automation can fix a lot of these problems. And I know Thomas is going to talk more about that later, so I won't talk too much about it. I'll just mention that based on our experience in the demand-side subsidy program administered by REA in Nigeria, where technology was used where the Odyssey platform was connected to the PayGo software such that they could verify when payments were made against an account and use that as the verification method. It led to much more frequent payouts, less time between submission and payment, and addressed a lot of these barriers that we've talked about here. In advance, yep. I think there might be one more slide.
Yep, so you should be concluding, Carl?
Okay, that's the last slide, okay. Yes, so in terms of upfront versus sustainability payouts, so one thing to consider is that you're trying to, there should be attempts to ensure that companies are not just in it for opportunistic reasons and that they're going to dump a bunch of products at low prices and then leave the market. And so you want to encourage companies to build after sales capabilities and collections capabilities rather than just focusing on upfront sales. And having the full payout upfront can lead to this kind of opportunistic behavior. So we do recommend that at least some portion of the overall subsidy is tied to building out of that infrastructure and is paid out at a later date instead of everything up front. Again, just to avoid some of this opportunistic behavior that could be incentivized. Okay, and that's it from my section.
Yep. Thanks, Carl. Good to hear the real experience from the ground. I would like to remind everybody in this call that when we are talking about end user subsidy, the intention is to reach universal access, because we know if we go to the pace as it is now, still you have people without electricity. So we need to have subsidy to ensure no one is left behind. So yeah, so we need to strike a balance during our discussion in terms of scaling up the models, scaling up the subsidy scheme, being bigger, but also at the same time we need to make sure that we reach the subsidy helps to reach universal access. So I think we need to strike a balance there. But let's listen to what SNV have to say on that. Lynette, please go ahead. I know SNV have been key actors in terms of implementing the program, so I think we will hear a lot from what they have experienced so far in terms of managing the programs. Lynette, please go ahead.
Thank you, Colin. Greetings once again to everyone participating in this webinar. Okay, I'll be speaking on our experience as SNV in managing and implementing subsidy programs and how to have effective results. And this is from majorly a fund manager's point of view, our experience in these programs, in implementing these subsidy programs. Next slide, please. Yes, so I'll be talking about 4 key areas. Basically the planning of a subsidy program, the implementation, and then monitoring and evaluation. But also we'll talk about partnership because it involves a lot of stakeholders. Next slide, please. Yes. So in planning a subsidy program, what are the key things to consider? The objective has to be clear. What do you plan to achieve with this program? What are the project outcomes? Who are you targeting in this program? Are you targeting the core market? Are you targeting vulnerable households? How is the area? Is it arid or semi-arid? And then also in terms of choosing your targets, they have to be realistic and very achievable. To deliver on your results, you need to have a good team. What has worked for SNV is having a good team in place. You need a technical expert, you need an analyst, you need an M&E person, you need finance because it involves a lot of finance disbursements. How are you going to track? You need somebody to communicate on what you're doing. The other thing that is important in your planning is the stakeholder forums. You need feedback from the people whom you'll be working with, the people in the sector. They can tell you whether this works or this doesn't work. So this is a part that really should be neglected in your planning before you start implementing. They're able to guide how to help you write your manuals, what feedback do they give, what is expected in the market in the future. So as you plan, whether it's a 5-year program, 10-year program, you're able to plan ahead of time. So these are very key, important people to include. These ones can be government, private sector, the people who will be implementing these programs with you at this particular point. Next slide, please. Then in the implementation of the subsidy programs, what have we found out is that the application has to be simple. And once again, I would agree also with this audience, it has to be inclusive. What in our experience is sometimes you can have a very technical application template. Some people are excluded from this, but then also those who seem not to have been, let me say, in the middle, who seem not to have been good enough in their proposal, but end up really being very high achievers in implementation. So what I would advocate for is, in implementing of this program, let it be that it is all inclusive. Let everybody be given an opportunity to apply to be part of these subsidy programs. The other thing that also needs to be important, because it basically deals with flow of finance, it has to be clear what is accepted in the program, what is not accepted, how will the funds flow, how much, what are they, because a private sector would kind of calculate exactly if it makes business sense for him or for them in that particular organization, so they're able to plan for their cash flow for the year. So clarity of funds, limits, what can they, depending on the cash, what can they claim, what can they claim, what is allowable, and things like that. Communication channels need to be, is important. You can start a program at the outset and you already have, we should have channels of communication for feedback to you as the implementer, and also feedback on what you need to change in terms of implementation. Sometimes when you start a subsidy program, you really don't know what you're going to get on ground, and it might come back to you changing your plan, your initial plan, and adjusting one or two things so that the program flows with the intended outcomes. In terms of evaluation, it has to be clear to the applicants, what is the evaluation process, what are they expecting, what is expected in their due diligence, what is expected in terms of their capacity. What we find in terms of companies, and the reason why we do due diligence, a thorough due diligence, is we find that companies would come and they would overpromise the results. So you might allocate for them money and then they might not end up using it. Just what Carl was saying, some big companies would have to wait for the smaller companies, then they're able to be compensated for overachievement. So due diligence in terms of capacity, what can really this company achieve, so that they don't overpromise. Also, you find that companies also cannot come to you and tell you they're going to do a small amount of money, because maybe their management is not going to agree to offtake the project if they find that the results that they're proposing for the project is low, even though that is their capacity at that particular time. In terms of evaluation, it has to be clear also in terms of awarding, negotiation, and how we contract. Who are they contracting? What are their terms? When they come for negotiations of their monies, it has to be also clear to them, because what we have done so far, to cover up the overpromising, we have to have rationalization of these targets, because sometimes you even find what you have received is way over than what you have in terms of the money. So you have to rationalize some of these targets. That is our experience in terms of the implementation part of the subsidy programs. Next slide, please. Yes, now, the other part that is really important in terms of implementation is the risk. You have to factor in your risk, especially when you're managing the program, because you really don't know what's going to change, and it's good for you to anticipate at each level. For example, some of the risks that can come in is government tax. It can be passed on at any time. Recently in Kenya, we do have those ones who are banking on carbon markets. I think the government now has said 25% needs to go to the government. So carbon projects may or may not, so it's positive or negative, may change, because if you had banked on implementing a carbon project, the government might come in with a policy of they are taking X amount of the carbon credits into the government. What are you going to do about it? Data protection issues, you deal a lot of data. Then also you have partner relationship risk. Will this company be able to carry out the project to the end? Will they quit in the middle? Then you also have other financial risks that you may find also in implementing, which you have to factor in, depending on how many companies. Remember, there are companies that will default. You have to factor that in as much as you're going to try to minimize that during due diligence. You really can't know what a company will go through suddenly. Then we have company mergers and acquisitions. Then you have bankruptcy. If a company declares bankruptcy, what are you going to do? What happens to their targets? Will it be reallocated? What just happens? So then you have the uncontrolled risks. What do you do in terms of implementing a project and there's extreme weather conditions? There was a time in being in Kenya, there was some time we had invasion of locusts in some of the counties. So what are you going to do? Because people have to now shift in terms of looking into energy products to other things that are more important to the household. So these are some of the risks that we have encountered, not an exclusive list, but some of these really affect implementation of the project as a whole, and you have to come up with mitigation measures in the implementation part of the project. Next slide, please.
Yes. Lynette, 1 more minute. I'm sorry to intervene. 1 more minute.
Yes, that's okay. Okay, Colin, were you giving me 1 minute to finish my presentation? I was not
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, very quickly also, what you've learned in terms of in managing subsidy programs is you must have a really good relationship with the different stakeholders. So there are those ones who you collaborate with, there are those ones who you implement with. Next slide, please. And then this is very important, the monitoring and evaluation aspect. It has been touched on and it should still be talked about, but one thing I want to highlight is, I think it's in the next slide, but have a CRM system, have a finance tracking system, because you need to track. Automation of systems, really, really important. I think it will be talked about in the next segment. And then knowledge management, what have you learned? And then also, how do you manage your partners and stakeholders? Some of them will need training, some of them will need capacity building to be able to deliver on the results. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Lynette. It has been good to hear from you. Inclusivity, automation seems to be the talk in this particular session. But let's hear from Tom. I think Tom will talk more about the verification piece. Tom, please, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Colin. I want to start with an anecdote, since Lynette from SNV just spoke. Back in 2013-14, there was a result-based finance scheme in Tanzania. And Mobisol, the company I was working with at the time, was participating in that. And we had an internal remote monitoring platform within Mobisol, where we could see every single system, solar home system installed. We could see how much energy it was producing, whether the customer was paying or not. And when we started enrolling in that SNV RBF, we actually asked Martijn Veen, who was running that program at the time, and said, why don't you come to our offices and we'll show you how we see the systems through our database, because we believe this is much more real data than if you send somebody to the field to check whether there's a solar home system installed somewhere and whether it's working. And SNV looked at it, did a couple of manual checks, and then agreed that the whole claim submission of Mobisol would basically be done through the platform we had. And at the time, and it's 10 years ago, it took 14 days between the moment we submitted the claim and gave SNV access to our platform and the moment the money was disbursed. And I think, when I hear you, Carl, and others, I'm sure 14 days is still best practice today. And I just want to remind all of us that, that was best practice 10 years ago. So now moving from Mobisol to Access to Energy Institute, the idea behind providing this open source platform that we have that we call Prospect is basically to go back to the times and to give those companies that may not have all the tools that Lynette mentioned before, the CRMs and whatnot, at their disposition, so that claim management can be done as easily as it was done 10 years ago. And I'm just going to show you a couple of slides, and then I really want to go into Q&A rather than, pitching you Prospect, because, it can do what is required to basically, share the claims verification with the IVA and whatnot. I'll go through that in 5 minutes, and then I'd rather discuss with you than present. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's basically something that I think we all agree on. The problem is that there is no platform today where you basically see the system, the payment, and where you basically have this entirety of information that you need to do claims verification. And I think the slides will be shared anyhow. So next slide, please. What Prospect is basically doing, it's taking two different sorts of information and putting it together. The first one, we call it fingerprint. That's basically the standard information, name of customer, geolocations, what system is installed and whatnot. So that's static, typical database information. And the other one we call the heartbeat is any kind of time series associated with that system. So it's either, how much energy is being consumed or generated, how is the customer paying or not, and specifically, has an RBF payment been released that is, associated to that system. And once you have that information, and the next slide is going into how you do that. Can I have the next slide, please? So on the left-hand side, you see the energy service providers. If they actually have information as to the customer, the payments, and so on, we are building the APIs or the connectors, as we call it, to put it in this thing in the middle, which is essentially Prospect. And then whatever comes out of Prospect can be used for carbon certification, can be given to a RIA, can be given to an investor, or in this specific case, I should have added an IVA, for example, to basically look at the data. And I have, in the next couple of slides, I have very specific dashboards which actually show you that we're already doing it today with Prospect. And next slide, please. So this is, for example, something where if the ESP has uploaded data to Prospect or has given us the authorization to access data from the ESP, then you basically have, and it's very important, the data belongs to the ESP. Prospect doesn't own any data. And then the ESP can basically decide what granularity of data he or she wants to share with, say, the RIA, the IVA, or whoever's managing the demand-side subsidy. And you can basically really select at the level of the data point, saying, I will give this data point, this data point, this data point to IVA called XYZ, to make sure that only the IVA or the DSS manager sees that information. But it's basically the beginning of the digital verification. And coming back to the poll we had before, 91% of you are preferring a hybrid element. We're providing the technological, the digital verification bit. And, over time, I think if you realize that your manual verification is actually returning the same results than the digital one, I would hope that, the number of manual verification goes down over time, simply because we're establishing more trust with a technological, basically with a digital platform. Next slide, please. That's basically, we are sending a lot of Excel sheets through the world, but, that's also one of the features of Prospect, where you as an ESP can basically send the claim file to the DSS or to the IVA through Prospect. And Prospect in the middle is basically acting as a single source of truth or trust, if you want, that the data that you're submitting is actually linked to real systems which are working in the field, etc., etc. We're building something like this for the UECCC in Uganda as we speak. They are actually checking in a manual. So basically, we're establishing a digital process which is mimicking what's done manually. And as we go along, as I was, expressing my hope, the digital element of it will be the dominant one, whilst the manual one goes down. Next slide, please. And the IVA is one of the most expensive elements of any verification process today. And the idea, and that's something we're also doing in Uganda, but also in other countries, is basically to give the IVA access to the Prospect platform, so that the IVA is not running around with printed out Excel sheets, so that also the process of the verification by the IVA is kind of mapped and registered by Prospect. And that's just slides that basically show you that it's already doable and feasible today. This is just listing the benefits of doing it digitally. And I think the last slide, and I'll stop there, is basically there are two main limitations. One is basically if there's no data coming from the systems. So if you cannot show that the system is actually generating energy because of no GSM network, or the SIM card is too expensive, or the system is too small to even warrant kind of a data sending thing, then there's other proxies, such as if the customer's paying, then he or she's probably happy with the system, and it's an okay proxy in terms of realizing a system is alive and has been used by the customer, and the other one is using a digital platform such as Prospect or any other one actually is really reducing any kind of fraud attempt, simply because you can check whether a device is fake, whether there's a double reporting, whether names are the same, telephone numbers and whatnot. And maybe last thing before I stop is when you do the manual verification, and I understand that in the beginning of introducing digital processes, one would want to have both processes in parallel. The Access to Energy Institute has developed something that we call the Impact Survey Bot. It's a WhatsApp bot where you can basically converse with the customer on a WhatsApp base if the customer has a telephone that does WhatsApp, which is again, putting a digital process within the manual verification. It's a tool which just as Prospect is free of charge. So if any of you in the call is interested in testing the WhatsApp bot to do the manual bit of your verification, more than happy to provide that. And I'll stop here and hope I've taken less than 10 minutes.
Precisely, Tom, exactly 10 minutes. So that's good. It was very good to hear your insights about the verification. So right now is Q&A session that everybody was waiting for, but I can see most of you have been using the chat box. So any question that you can pose orally, let me see your hand, and then we. I don't see any hand. Yeah, maybe to start the Q&A session, I've seen two popular questions on the chat box. I think, Carl, if you don't mind, can you talk a bit about this upfront payment that you've been talking about on your slide? There seems to be a lot of interest. Carl?
Yeah, I think the terminology I used around upfront payment was probably a little bit confusing. So when I was referencing upfront payments, I was still talking in the context of results-based financing. So this is a payment made after the results are achieved and the verification has been completed. And it's the typical way that subsidy programs are designed today. You submit your results, you get the subsidy payout. However, examples of programs like CISO, for example, in Togo, where the payment is not one upfront payment, it is paid over course of time. And COSAP, I think, is another good example where they have some upfront component and a sustainability component, just to ensure that companies are developing after-sales infrastructure, collections infrastructure for pay-as-you-go companies. And the way that you would confirm or validate the subsequent payment or payments would be some sort of confirmation that the product is still in use and being serviced by the company. So that could be confirmation that customers are still making payments against that account, or it could be some other method. But I think people might have interpreted upfront payment to mean a payment before the results were delivered, but that was not what I meant to convey.
Okay, thanks, Carl, for that clarity. And then I can see also a lot of comments around the demand side subsidy toolkit that we have mentioned here that OCA, Open Capital Advisors, are preparing. Fede, if you don't mind, can you talk a bit about the toolkit, where we are, how can members here contribute? Fede?
Sure, not a problem, but I think you may not be seeing people raising hands. There were hands raised from Maria, Stephen, and Ulrich that you may want to call on.
And Federico, since you're talking, I think a question on data privacy, I'd like to answer that speaking rather than in a long message, if it's okay.
Yeah. Yes, I think there's a question from Maria. Maria, please, can you speak up?
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, your question about demand side subsidy.
Yes, exactly. So I put it already in the Q&A, but yeah, just want to ask what are opinions here across the panelists on demand side versus supply side subsidies? So how do you think they should work together potentially? And in which case would you prefer a demand side subsidy versus where do you rather see supply side subsidies being important? Thank you.
I can comment on that. So it's something we talked a lot about in that group of private sector players that I mentioned that were kind of developing this framework for demand side subsidies. So the use of supply side subsidies versus demand side subsidies is context dependent. In markets that are quite mature, that already have several players operating at scale, there might not need to be any supply side subsidies at all, or if there are, they might be targeted towards certain geographies where those players aren't currently very active. And the way I see in markets that are more nascent, you would want to have a supply side subsidy component and a demand side subsidy component. And the reason I see, I mentioned that I think company payouts are the best way to do demand side subsidy delivery, is that you can easily structure a program where you meld them together, supply side subsidy with demand side subsidy, and you can have a higher subsidy payout, for example, in harder to reach areas, because a component of that is supply side subsidy and the rest is demand side subsidy, and then lower subsidy payouts in easier to reach areas where it's only demand side subsidy because there's already supply in those areas, the distribution infrastructure is already built out. So I think that using the RBF as a tool and as one single method of subsidy delivery can allow you to customize within a country the exactly how you want to do subsidy delivery. And you could even add in components where you say maybe you have a particular population that you want to give a higher subsidy to. For example, let's say refugees. You can have a bonus where if it's someone in this database of refugees, they get an additional subsidy value. Or maybe you want to incentivize female customers. You could have an additional subsidy tied to that. So I think it's a very versatile tool that can be used to address whatever the objectives are of the person administering the subsidy.
Good. Thanks, Carl, for that clarification. Then maybe I can move up to another question. I think this was from Federico and is posed to Thomas. So Fede is asking, are data privacy regulation likely to be a limitation factor to your verification approach at some point? Yeah. Tom?
So we considered that very closely, obviously, because and we realized if we try to basically adhere to every data privacy rule in 55 countries, it's going to be very difficult. So we established another mechanism. What happens when you give data to prospect is it's encrypted the moment it actually reaches the prospect platform. So we never see the information in clear. So we never see the name of the customer or anything. And whilst you're giving access to prospect in an encrypted way, you as an ESP are the only one who have the decryption key. So when you decide to basically give access to the information to the IVA, who will obviously require the name of the customer, the GPS location and whatnot, but it basically never becomes like visible for prospect itself. So we avoid any data privacy conflicts by doing this encryption decryption process, which makes sure that you as the ESP are at any moment in time in the process the owner of the data, and you decide who sees the data and who doesn't. So to answer your question, it's not a concern because of that mechanism we implemented, Federico. And happy to share more detailed technical information for anybody who would want to be, reassured in a more detailed way, but then I'll put you in contact with our programmers who can tell you exactly how it works.
Thanks, Tom. I can see a hand from Ulrich Zimmerman. Please go ahead. Ask your question, please, Ulrich.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Two things. Yeah. One question on the one hand regarding the verification processes. Yeah, is there some kind of benchmark or any kind of information like where people thought about what's the cost per system in the current verification process? Yeah, because of the concept with remote monitoring. My question would be more or less at which stage there is a benefit for remote monitoring in this process. Yeah, because remote monitoring adds cost. Yeah, so the question is for which kind of system it would be applicable. Yeah, so to not basically add too much cost to the end user in this kind of process. Yeah, because it's simply additional hardware which leads to additional cost. And the second question is, I'm not sure to whom this would be directed, but there was the point about how I think there's often with this demand side topics, there's the question about how to get the first batch financed, so to speak. Yeah, like for a distributor, like how can you get the financing at least for the first round? Yeah, because if you would establish like a system where you have like a 4-year project, it's always about the question, how can you get more or less like the first the first consignment in the field, because with the money that you get from the first consignment, you could also finance basically later consignments. Yeah. So therefore, those two questions, yeah, like at which stage remote monitoring brings a value add in the credit in the verification process, like at which system size it would be interesting, and the other one, how to get it more into such a rolling thing, yeah, where like, okay, you get maybe like a first financing for systems, and then later on you will not get the financing, you need to retain the money from your from your systems in the field for demand side subsidy. I hope that was not too too much stuff together.
Yep. Tom, would you like to go ahead with remote verification?
I think so. You know, I'm going to repeat myself, but I think so. I don't know exactly what the costs are for manual verification, but since we're putting a tool at the disposition of the sector, which is free of charge, and that we're going to help you build the APIs and the interfaces that make sure that you can actually put your data on Prospect, I'd rather, you know, start with, you know, very specific pilot projects, and we're doing that already with Uganda and a couple of other countries. And I think there's no, you know, because the tool, once it's built, you know, if it works for one RBF, it's very likely to work for many others. So my hunch is that it will probably be useful even in smaller RBF as we actually, you know, train putting RBF processes in a digital manner. And I don't think there should be like a minimum size or anything, you know, and over time, my hope would be that any RBF is designed from the first moment on, you know, to include digital verification and to invite companies that benefit from RBFs to actually discuss with us or any other platform for that matter, how to basically put data and what type of data is needed, because you don't need all the data to just do the claims verification. So my, you know, guess is if we meet in 12 months time, we will have enough pilot projects, real pilot projects to look at, and the cost per connection plus, you know, the transparency and the, you know, just to take one example, if you use a digital means and you have this heartbeat information that I mentioned before, you will be able to see whether a payment that's been released for a system is actually, you know, associated to a system that runs 3 years later. So you'll have like the average, you know, you'll have a length of time, which you don't have if you just do a manual process once in a while. So I would hope that over time we will see that every RBF scheme has a digital component when it comes to verification.
Thanks, Tom. I think Linit, you want to also to contribute onto that. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add that in terms where you'd need manual verification, it depends what products, but for clean cooking, we find that you would really require manual verification for that, because you really can't track a stove apart from the ones that use solar panels, you really can't track a stove manually with a GPS, whether it's working or not at that particular point. So it will depend on the program. And I think that's why people are preferring hybrid, because it works for both, it covers both. Then the other thing I just wanted to mention was on the next question that he had asked on financing, what would you require? Usually there are programs that would have a debt facility, so you can get a debt facility for your inventory. And also what we do finance, which I think Carl was talking about, upfront costs, we call it a different term, we call it market entry, to help you go into the market and enter a new market, so you're able to ask for these funds in advance. Our experience is maybe because of the area where we are, there was a lot of financing that was around that people could get to finance their business, and people opted for that. So we had a bit of debt uptake, as well as other people sourcing finances from elsewhere to be able to finance their first year of inventory. That's what I wanted to answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynette. Carl, please go ahead.
I'll keep it really brief. So on that first question around the cost of GSM and when the cost curves cross in terms of manual verification versus having GSM, I don't think you necessarily need to have GSM. So I don't think that comparison is required. For example, in the program I was mentioning in Nigeria, where we did remote verification, we didn't have GSM enabled products. The verification was done based on payments. So GSM, having a GSM module in the product and paying for telemetry isn't required in order to do remote verification.
Thanks, Carl. There's a question, I'm not sure whether it was answered. I think it was from Steve. He was asking about the manual verification, either telephone, by using telephone, or a field visit. And the question was, how would samples for verification be structured? I don't think that question was answered. How would samples for verification structured, considering telephone and field visit? Can we have a response on to that?
Yes, can I answer?
Yes, please, Lynette, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So from our experience working with the different independent verification agents, we find that they use different methodologies in terms of using to get part of a sample. So you'd find some would put a company in terms of risk, and based on their sample, they would use risk to be able to determine the amount of sample to go to the field. Most of the time is you find that if the phone verification is successful, they will do a very small sample on the field verification. But if it's not, they have a methodology where they would also try to balance between the field and the phone. But we find that mostly it's the phone that would determine the field sample of verification. So that is what I've seen so far with the different verification agents that we have. But very different, they use very different methodologies to range for the program on the amount of sample that should go into the program. And that is usually clearly also communicated to the companies, so that they know with this sample, this is what they will get as part of verification. Yes, and they far as go ahead to tell you, these are the people we are going to visit in this and this place. So they communicate the list of the field verification. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette, for answering that question. I can see we are running out of time. Maybe one bonus question before we close the Q&A session, and then we... Good. I think this was a very rich discussion. At the end of the day, I found that the team were more onto verification. So there was not much discussion around selection of companies or disbursement. It was more on verification. Looks like there are more challenges around that area. And I think such kind of discussion will continue so that everybody is confident, and at the end of the day, we have smart subsidies in place. So I think to wind up, I would love to to share with you the next steps. What are we going to do? As I said in the beginning, from September, we were deliberating on the key consideration of the design, the 5 key consideration, and we are almost there. So our next webinar will be around exit strategy. You can register for this for this webinar online on our website. But I think it's a tricky subject. It's a tricky subject in the sense that because we have a job to do, and our job to do is to ensure that we have universal access and no one is left behind. So why should we talk about exit? Why should we exit before the goal of universal access is achieved? But nevertheless, there will be this discussion, as I said, in our next webinar, because it looks like on a program level, you still need to design your exit strategy. And therefore, we'll discuss various approaches to a program level exit strategy so that we ensure that there is a responsible exit, including ending the program when the targets are met. But another key important question that we will ask ourselves in that discussion is, do we really have the funds to implement the programs we are talking here? So yeah, as I said, register for that webinar. Brenda, remind me, what is the date? Brenda, are you there?
Yes, it's on the 6th of December.
Exactly. And then, of course, another thing which is important to note is there is this ongoing work to prepare the toolkit. We would love to receive your inputs. So you can see our contact or in front of you. You can write direct to me, or you can write to Federico from the World Bank. As I said, our aim is to end this work by the end of the year, but it will be great to hear and incorporate your inputs. Otherwise, I would love to take this time to really thank you all for taking your time to participate in this call. And also, on a special note, our esteemed speakers, Tom, Carl, and Lynette. I think it was very, very good contribution from your side. And I think you let us really understand what is happening on the ground. So that was good to hear. I encourage everybody to join us again in our next webinar on the 6th of December. Otherwise, I wish everybody a very good morning, very good afternoon, and a very good evening. Thank you.